Hello, I'm George Liston, CA. Welcome to Dialogue, a program that explores the world of ideas and issues in international affairs, history, and culture. France has now elected the 6th president of the 5th Republic. His name is Nikolas Sarkozy, and for the next 5 years he will govern France and attempt to strengthen her domestic harmony and enhance her international prestige. To accomplish these goals, President Sarkozy promises a calm break with the policies of the past. And it seems wise to take him at his word. He takes office with a reputation for energy and toughness, and he is a well-seasoned politician, representing a new generation of leadership. No one can say at this time what the fate of the Sarkozy regime will be, but no one can deny either that this is a presidency of historic importance for France and for the world. My guest is Patrick Chamorel, resident scholar at Standford University in Washington, D.C. Patrick, welcome to Dialogue.
Welcome.
It's always a pleasure to have you as a guest on our program, and especially so today, Patrick. Let me begin this way. On the 6th of May, I believe it was, 84% of the French electorate went to the polls, and they, of course, were faced with a choice. They chose President Sarkozy. But that choice was, of course, dictated by their concerns, and I'd love for you to give us a sense of them. I know that they had a sense of economic stagnation, perhaps, and of course of civic unrest, the unsettled state of minorities. But here's a phrase I heard, and I'd love to get you to comment on this in your answer. A France that had all but lost faith in itself. Is that true?
It's somewhat true. The two big questions during the campaign, and actually for many years, have been one, as you said, the economic stagnation of the country. High unemployment, around 10%, and going down a little bit recently, but not very much. And the other issue has been related to immigration and the way to integrate immigrants. And that led to a crisis of national identity. Because France was no longer sure of what it is about, of its own destiny. And there was lots of unease in the whole countries and in all economic and social categories of the people.
That's very striking. On that crisis of identity, that phrase also is very, very powerful to me. Is part of that France's perhaps unsettled attitude toward globalization? Has France found this 21st century economic world climate congenial or not?
Not as much as comparable countries. France is doing fairly well in economic competition, which is sometimes not really seen overseas.
Right.
But there are many success stories in France. Very big corporations have emerged and are very successful on world markets. The problem is that the idea of globalization is not really making great strides, great progress.
Right.
And politicians are somewhat responsible for that.
Right.
They, instead of being pedagogical about it and encouraging people to change, to adjust to globalization, they, on the contrary, kind of, take the rug out of, under them, and keep, painting globalization as something threatening.
You use the word change in your answer, and one of the things that's striking about the May 6th election, particularly in terms of President Sarkozy, because he was the one who said, if you want dramatic change, I'm your man, basically. And I guess that's my next question to you, Patrick. The public went to the polls in the mood you've described. They then said that they were willing to, I suppose, change and sacrifice to make the progress they want to make. Do you believe that? Do you think the French public really wants to make major sacrifice, particularly economic ones, to achieve a more dynamic France in the future? Will Sarkozy find a receptive public to follow him, basically?
Well, I think you have to look at France as, three general categories of people. And of course, that's simplification, but that's still useful to look at it that way. You have the France that succeeds, people who are executives or they are used to looking at the world as opportunities. They are the winners.
Right.
Then you have people who are, we feel threatened by globalization, and many of these people are in the public sector, which is of course very, very large in France.
Exactly.
And these people are, quite privileged, in terms of income and retirement and all kinds of perks, if you want. And then you have the third France. This is the France that is left behind. This is the France that, has great difficulties to cope with globalization.
And is this third France, the one that's left behind, is that largely the one we heard about at the time of the riots? The urban youth, the immigrant youth are not finding jobs and such?
Yes, absolutely. This is part of this third France. And another part is, small businessmen, not therefore immigrants usually. So there are many categories in that third France, but all of them had been seeking solutions and answers to the extremes.
Yeah.
Either the far left, which is still close to 10% in France, which is still very high,
Right.
and then the far right, Le Pen, who did not as well, of course, as 5 years ago, but it's still around 10% of the vote.
I want to ask you about Jean-Marie Le Pen and also François Bayrou, because they also influenced the election as candidates in the first round. But to these sort of major challenges and questions you've just described that the French public is posing, what are Sarkozy's answers? If I asked you, Patrick, how would you describe, even briefly, what the economic plan that he's going to present to his people is going to be? What would it be?
Well, the France that wins, they want actually to roll back the state somewhat. The France that is protected in the public sector wants, on the contrary, to point to the threat of globalization. And the third one, of course, they also want more protection, but they are usually anti-statist. It's a mixed ideology. Sarkozy is trying to answer questions from all of these groups.
Right.
He wants to free up energies and job creation, of course, and wants to see more entrepreneurship in the country, and therefore to readjust legislation to encourage that. He wants to also deregulate the job market, and this is fundamental. I think he's pointing to examples overseas, especially in Britain and the United States, where unemployment is low, to show that maybe a little less protection is good for the economy and good for jobs. And he would like companies to hire more easily because they can fire more easily. And of course he wants to lower taxes. So he wants to get rid as what is often referred to here as the death tax.
The estate tax.
The estate tax. And he wants to also diminish public spending, in the sense that it is against a society where everybody gets something out of the state. He wants people to make their own money, not to receive it from the state.
That's a very clear explanation of the next domestic economic agenda he's going to put forward. The obvious question, Patrick, is who are his opponents? Who's going to make that hard for him to do? How strong are they?
Well, in the economic realm, it's mostly the unions who are very powerful in the public sector, not in terms of membership, but in terms of influence. Unions are they have about 8% of the active population among their ranks, which is very, very low. And it's even lower for the private sector.
Right.
When you see strikes in France and demonstrations, etc., it's very seldom from the private sector. 90% of strikes and demonstrations, they come from the public sector, which ironically is the most privileged, of course. So I think these people have a culture of protest.
It's interesting in that regard. In doing research for our conversation, I came across something that puzzled me, and maybe you can explain it, that one of his initiatives is going to be to do something about the transportation sector to make it, as I understood it, impossible for them to strike, so that you can't close cities down. Is that right? It's, in other words, a force, I suppose, the civil service to always stay on the job.
Exactly. You can strike. You cannot take away the right to strike. But during the days of strike, he wants to make sure that these trains or other services are still running. And so the number of potential strikers will be forced to stay on the job and to do what they have to do. So people will not be stranded in railway stations or metro stations.
Very interesting. Patrick, I think it's fair to say, at least in my lifetime, this may have been one of the most closely observed French elections everywhere. I'm talking about outside of France, and largely because it was so colorful. When you got down to the last two, we had Ségolène, a very charismatic, telegenic personality, and of course, Nikolas Sarkozy, who won. It's also true that, as I mentioned before, you had Jean-Marie Le Pen and François Bayrou very strong in the first round. And Patrick, I think it's fair to say that strong candidates influence the governments that succeed them, whether they win or not. In other words, Bayrou was, as I understand it, trying to push a centrist ideal for French politics, which is, I thought, a new departure. And Jean-Marie Le Pen is famous or infamous, depending on how you look at it, for his nativist and anti-immigrant stance. In what ways, if any, do you think these candidates influenced or moderated Sarkozy's approach? I mean, did you see him tempering any of his messages, or is he making concessions to any of these groups?
Well, certainly. This election has to be understood in a context and a timeline that starts in at least 2002. That's when, of course, Le Pen made it to the runoff of the election.
Right.
And then Sarkozy understood that the center-right will keep losing elections because precisely the right was split between the center-right and Le Pen.
Right.
And the left, of course, would take advantage of that. Okay. And therefore, he decided that in order to win in the future, he will have to appeal to some of the voters of Le Pen. And that, of course, made him talk more about issues that were taboo, had been taboo until then, because supposedly they would only benefit Le Pen. So he talked about immigration, about integration, about law and order, crime, which has been rising in France, and that paid off very well.
Is it fair from what you just said to say that he moved his party rightward in a very creative sort of 21st century way?
No, there is no question that French politics has moved to the right. Sarkozy has renovated the right, in the last 5 years, to make it a more conservative right, a more pugnacious one, on all kinds of issues like the one I just mentioned, as well as on freeing up the economy, liberalizing the economy. So there is no question that French politics have moved to the right, and of course the left will have to, as a result, to adjust itself to the same thing. In a word, George, this has been the equivalent of Reagan or Thatcher's victory in the political system, even though Sarkozy is nowhere as free market and as ideological as either Margaret Thatcher or Ronald Reagan. He's more like a Blair, if you want. But Blair, only had to manage the legacy of Thatcher. On the contrary, Sarkozy has to make all of these reforms himself.
From the start.
Yes.
Yeah, this is interesting. That is really helpful, particularly to an American audience, to understand that. One place that I think, Patrick, he's bound to face a challenge really early and very dramatically is on the question of immigrants and the new immigrant community. I mean, the screen images we all saw of rioting youth in 2005 and later. And the fact that we're told, at least, that this is a community that's a little bit dubious about Sarkozy suggests that's going to be a challenge. Now, my question to you is, one of his proposals was for a form of affirmative action, as we would call it here, which runs counter to the rest of the right wing philosophy. What's going to happen with that?
Well, a little bit. That was a big theme for Sarkozy up until close to the election, but then he kind of dropped it because it's not well accepted within his own party, and certainly not in the general population either. The French tradition of Republican immigration, integration rather. Where
everyone being French.
Everybody is a French citizen, and that's all that matters, and we don't look at where they come from and etc. So, this has been dropped during the campaign, but it's bound to come back in some other ways. Sarkozy is keen to work on the question of discrimination and give him more opportunities to these immigrants in the suburbs. But he's not, he doesn't want to turn France into a multicultural society. Let's be clear about this, though. France is a multicultural society, descriptively. This is what it is, and people have realized that. However, as a policy, this will not be the policy to encourage groups to develop their own identity and to promote their own interests. It will still be very much the old integrationist model.
One thing that we should understand right now, I'm speaking of myself and our audience, is his ability to do everything you're talking about depends on an understanding of what the French presidency is. And of course, we can compare it to the American presidency, but there are some significant differences. I know you've written a great deal about this, and one that I suspect may be true is that he has a lot more power, or substantially more power than an American president does. Is that right?
I think so, yes, because he doesn't have to negotiate with the legislature. If the prime minister...
If his party controls the legislature, right?
Yes, well, usually he does. But sometimes legislative elections give a majority to the opposite camp.
That's called cohabitation.
That's called cohabitation, as you know. And so the prime minister is on the other side. And that makes things very complicated and usually leads to paralysis. So there will be very shortly in June another, a legislative election. And Sarkozy's party, the UMP, is supposed to win that election.
So that was one of my questions. You think they're going to come out on top?
It's pretty sure, actually, pretty certain that they will come up on top with about the number of deputies that they have today.
Right.
But these deputies, will give allegiance to Sarkozy, not to Chirac anymore.
I want to turn to the government he's already forming, his cabinet, and your understanding of what that might represent for France. But there's one question I want to stick in real quick, because I can't resist it, just in terms of gossip and personality. The first thing he did after winning was to go on vacation in the Mediterranean on a yacht. Now, you can read that many ways, depending on whether you're pro-Sarkozy or anti, I suppose. And he's also famous for being a combative personality, a tough guy, basically. So I guess, Patrick, it's a question of opinion. Are his political sensitivities, his charm, his ability to relate and to understand how you deal with it, is that what it should be?
Well, one thing one cannot say about Sarkozy is that he lacks political sense. He's proven pretty good at it. But
public relations sense, I mean the sense to understand the importance of image and such.
Yes. Well, yes, he's been more active with the media than any previous president or campaigner. But on the yacht question, I believe that he made a mistake going into the Mediterranean on a yacht. The French don't kind of accept the idea that he would have a rest after campaigning very hard, and even that he would go a little far in terms of the luxury of the vacation. What they didn't like is that this yacht is owned by a French billionaire, which is a friend of Sarkozy, and Sarkozy, borrowed the yacht from him.
That's different.
That they don't like.
that is different. I myself would say that. To his cabinet, he's already, I think, cut it in half, the size of the cabinet he's going to use to govern with. I think it's 15 members now. And most strikingly to me, half are women, which I think is a very strong statement. One of whom I believe is a North African-born Frenchwoman, which is also a statement too. And in that cabinet, there's a very intriguing gentleman named Bernard Kouchner, foreign minister, who many say is the most popular politician in France on the left. And he's also known for his humanitarian devotion. He's a founder of Doctors Without Frontiers. Putting all this together, what's your analysis of what these cabinet choices mean for the way that Sarkozy is going to govern?
Well, Sarkozy is a very polarizing figure. And most of his opponents didn't vote for Ségolène Royal, but voted against Sarkozy. So he has to resolve this. When you're elected French president, you have to reunite the whole country because the campaign has been so divisive. And of course, there is this election in a couple of weeks. And he wants to, the opposition to be unable to say, well, you know, you cannot have just one party governing the country. So this really deflects this kind of criticism.
Yeah. But aren't these very strong liberal steps as well? I mean,
yes, Sarkozy has really reached out to the left during the campaign, especially to workers, saying that the left has abandoned them, and that has a translation obviously in the cabinet. I just believe that he wants to get all the support he wants and needs for reforms.
In this context, going back to your earlier characterization of Sarkozy kind of inheriting or representing a Thatcher-Reagan heritage, does this mean the French left now has a kind of Bill Clinton challenge to redefine itself for the next election?
Oh, absolutely. It's a huge challenge. Many people say that Ségolène was a weak candidate. She probably was, but mostly it's the socialist ideas which are bankrupt. And the party has nothing that appeals to people really, and they are the conservative party, literally.
Right.
So it has to renovate itself, just like the Democratic Party or the Labour Party after Thatcher and Reagan. And it will have to do so. It's going to be very, very difficult because there are issues of leadership and there are issues of doctrine. But they will probably move to the center, and maybe they will have to split. At least their left wing will have to split. We won't accept this kind of change. But the pressure is immense on them to change.
One of the areas we must discuss, obviously, is foreign affairs. And one of the most striking things about Nikolas Sarkozy, and it had a lot of resonance here, as you well know, was the way in which he, how to put it, I mean, he very forthrightly said he was very strongly, if not pro-American, certainly very close to America, even to the point of being very willing and anxious to be identified with this administration, which has popularity problems here. I find that fascinating. You know, not that he wants to be close to America, that's probably positive in the long run, but that he's so adamant about it. Now, how do you analyze that? Because it seems to me he may be well ahead of French opinion right now in that kind of approach.
Well, definitely. You know, when he came to Washington in late September of last year, he made a very, very pro-American speech. But that didn't play very well back at home. So he had to tone it down during the campaign. That being said, he certainly is a big admirer of American society, the energy, the optimism, and of the American economy. But that doesn't mean that he will follow America's lead on all issues and many issues in foreign policy. He wants to work more closely with the U.S., and that probably won't happen until the current American president is in the White House. But there will be signs that he will want to get into a more relaxed kind of relationship, even with Bush. But then, with the next U.S. president, I think things might change.
Yeah. This is intriguing to me for another set of reasons. France, like Holland, rejected the European Union's constitution. I guess this is a two-part question. What is his ideal or idea of France within Europe? What does he want France to be in terms of the European Union? And I'll hook that with the one that really fascinates me most of all is why is he so adamant that Turkey not be a part of the European Union?
Okay. Well, on the first question, he certainly wants France to lead Europe again, alongside Germany. But since the failed referendum on the EU constitutions 2 years ago, France has been out of the loop in Europe. And I think that not only France regrets that, but the rest of Europe, or most of it. So he wants to be very proactive on the European scene and to get this new treaty, which is the old constitution, you know, really become European law.
By slimming it down.
Slimming it down, yes, of course, because he has to give something to people who turn it down. But he wants to. He really wants this treaty to be adopted, and I think that his approach can converge with that of Merkel, certainly.
And as to Turkey?
Turkey is you're absolutely right. He has had very clear and strong positions against Turkey's membership in the EU, and this is unlikely to change. This is
Why does he feel that way, though? I mean, first of all, it's not going to be. The accession talks will last a decade, so it's not an immediate question. But I was just struck by how he insists on it so much.
Well, there is obviously an electoral aspect to that. People fear both, more immigration into France, and they also fear about the cohesiveness of Europe, of the European project. France has always been behind the vision of a fairly small Europe, very tight and deeply integrated Europe, but has had great difficulties really accepting Europe moving east, and now with Turkey, it's even more sensitive. Yeah.
This has been fascinating, absolutely, Patrick. I mean, you are a wonderful guide to modern French reality and world reality. One quick last question for one sentence, 10 seconds. We have a new generation of leadership. Angela Merkel in Germany, Gordon Brown in England, Nikolas Sarkozy in France. Are they going to cooperate, or will there be challenges? Just in a word.
Well, they are on the same ideological length, if you want, and that's something important, of course. At the same time, on many issues, there are differences.
Right.
The Constitution, Britain doesn't really want it,
right.
and Turkey, as you mentioned. So I think it will help
right.
Europe move forward and its relationship with the U.S.
We'll have to leave it.
But I think it's going to be tough once in a while.
I agree with you.
Yes.
Thank you, Patrick.
Thank you
very
George.
much.
Thank you very much.
And that's our program. We appreciate your comments, and you can reach us at dialogue at wilsoncenter.org. I'm George Liston, CA, and you've been watching Dialogue, a co-production of the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars and MHC Networks. Dialogue is also on the MHC Worldview channel, which is available to public TV stations nationwide. For more information, go to www.mhcworldview.org. Please join us again right here next week, and thank you for watching this week. Patrick, thank you.
Thank you, George.
I wish all my programs were like this. This is